So, good afternoon, everybody. Let us start today's webinar. This is a very important webinar, what we are doing in association with Economic Laws and Practices. And we have with us today Dr. Murthy, basically. Mr. Murthy is a labor law consultant at Economic Laws Practices. And he is a qualified lawyer and a university topper. So he has a lot of, if I go on reading his, biodata, it's really a very impressive one. I will just give you some insight into this. So prior to, he most recently served as Executive Vice President and Global Head of Human Resources of the Indian Hotels Company Limited, the Taj Group of Hotels, basically. And he continues to support Indian Hotels as HR advisor and independent consultant. Prior to that, PV worked with the Coca-Cola Company for a period of 15 years, 10 years of which he served as its Executive Director, Human Resources. Now, earlier PV has also worked in the manufacturing sector like ferroalloy steel for close to 13 years. So, if you look into this, so PV was there in large farms where they have large employees and very well-known names. So, based on that, in my opinion, very few people are having this kind of experience with regards to the labor laws. So today, the subject what we'll be dealing is the new labor code and its implications for the gems and jewelry industry. Now, this government, as you all know, that this government is in the path of reforms, and a lot of reform measures are taking place. And with the advent of COVID, basically, the government is accelerating those reforms measures. And one of the measures, of course, all the corporates have told and talked about is the labor reforms. So these labor reforms are happening, but you have to be always knowledge. You should be in the know of the things, that means what reforms are happening in the labor sector. So for that only we have organized this webinar, and we have also with us Nishant. Nishant Shah is, of course, a senior partner of tax and customs in ELP, and Nishant is not new to the council. He is, of course, we are working through him maybe for the last 15 years, if I am correct, or more. And so Nishant is a very good friend of the council and the trade, and he has, both of us together have, done a lot of reforms in the GST, in the, let's say the octroi previously. So all the reforms happened under the tutelage of Nishant, including the US GST. So that way, Nishant is not new to the industry. So it is a great combination you will be having today, where Nishant will act as a moderator and Mr. Murthy as a resource, basically, for this seminar. So one person who knows exactly the tax industry interface of the industry with Nishant, and from there he can always guide Mr. Murthy to give exact insight what the industry requires. So over to all of you and over to Nishant, basically, so you can take over, and best of luck to all the participants also today. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie. Appreciate the words you've spoken for us, the kind words, and of course for Dr. Murthy, I would just add a couple of more things, that with the more than 2 to 3 decades of experience which he has on labor laws, and there may be other HR consultants who will be knowing more about HR, but to know about the labor laws is a significant aspect, especially at this time when the whole network of the labor laws is undergoing a change in the country. And like you mentioned that, the new labor code is coming in. And when we talk about the new labor code, it is this 4 specific labor codes which are coming in. But these 4 codes are subsuming 29 different legislations which existed erstwhile, will be subsumed into these 4 labor codes. And therefore, it is going to be some amount of change. While there is some amount of consistency that the government has tried to retain, but we will hear Mr. Murthy speak about the changes which are coming about. What is more important is that having worked with this industry so close, we understand what is the nitty-gritty of this industry, and we understand the need of understanding these labor laws applicability for this industry, because like most of us here know, we don't just have our own employees. We work with outsourced labor. We work with job workers. We work with job workers, some of who work in their own locations, or some of who come in my office and work for me. So, there is a mix and match of every kind of labor component which exists in the organizations that work in this industry. Therefore, I believe that this has become very important. Also, prior to this new code coming in, we have worked with a number of members in the industry to help them structure their whole HR policy, the HR framework and things, which has had significant implications. So I am also aware of the HR structure that this industry has been adopting, and therefore I thought it's very important that we get views of Dr. Murthy expressing on this new code, how it is going to have an implication. Just last one point I'd like to say that with this new code coming in, we are already now in working with a number of members of this industry, helping them realign their HR structure, because there are issues under the new code which requires identification, classification of different personnel in different categorization. There is a need to revisit your entire HR proceedings manual and look into that. And finally, it is going to have a fiscal implication also on the PF ESIC, because the method of calculation of those, the PF aspects and things has also undergone a change. What is wage, what is the basic pay has also undergone change. I don't want to take too much time because I know we are restricted of time. In the process of moderation, we have already had a detailed discussion with Mr. Murthy, and he's tailored the presentation in a manner to reflect the needs of this industry. I would request the participants, if they have any questions, and I'm sure they'll have questions, feel free to raise your questions in the chat box. I would request Mr. Murthy, because of paucity of time, to first finish his presentation and then take up questions which will come up in the chat box. As ED also mentioned, I will be there to moderate it in the perspective that, specifics of the industry will be raised clearly to Mr. Murthy, so that we have his responses on those queries. So without much ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Murthy to take us through this presentation and explain to us the new labor code, which is intended to be introduced from the 1st of April in this country.
Thank you very much, Nishant. And also thanks very much for that nice and generous introduction, sir. So I think that, the flavor of the day is these new labor codes. Every industry, irrespective of in which businesses they are in, everyone is focusing on understanding these labor codes. And today also that's what we are going to do. And like Nishant has mentioned, structuring it specific to the industry or specific to that particular company within the industry is what we are looking at. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through a presentation. I have a few slides depicting as to what changes have been brought in through these labor codes. And once I finish, we will take a few questions. And if there is any shortage of time, we will certainly get back with our answers on those questions. So I'm just putting up the presentation on the screen, and Nishant, please help me to tell if you can see the presentation on the screen. Nishant, is it visible?
Yes, Dr. Murthy, it's visible. You may just need to do the slideshow. Yes, it's very clearly visible.
Yeah. So thanks once again, thanks to all of you for giving us this opportunity. I think that, ELP has been serving the entire industry for quite some time, and we have been advising some of the members of your industry on these matters, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to take you through this presentation. So in terms of the flow of my presentation, so this is what I'm going to do. I'll give you a snapshot of what is coming in, that is the executive summary in a nutshell as to what we are going to discuss in the subsequent presentation or the slides, and then deep diving into each one of the labor codes, and again looking at as to what is that major change that is coming in, and what have we been hearing from our clients, what are the concerns of the gems and jewelry industry, and also from various other industries, and what we have been hearing, and how do we address some of those concerns. And also we have a few suggested actions, broad-based as to, like Nishant has pointed out, there is a need for every company to deep dive into the HR policies or the compensation structures because of the kind of changes that have come in. Once we do that, we will have the discussion, and then we will take the questions, and we will try to answer to those questions. Looking at the executive summary as to what has changed or what has been brought in. We are all aware that there have been 4 codes that have come in. 29 acts, like Nishant has mentioned it. 29 of the labor legislations got repealed, and 4 new labor codes have been brought in. The first one, the Code on Wages, this came in 2019, August, in the month of August, this has been notified. And the other three codes, the Code on Social Security, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, and the Industrial Relations Code, they have come in 2020, and they got notified in September 2020. All the four codes have been received the assent of the President in the same month on 29th of September, and the government intends to implement these codes from 1st of April, right? And when we look at the objectives as to why they have done all these changes, the first and foremost thing is the government wanted to simplify the labor legislations in the country. If you look at it, some of the labor legislations were formulated way back in 1926. Say, for example, the Trade Unions Act was formulated in 1926, and subsequently there were very minimal changes to that particular act. So the government wanted to simplify and also consolidate. Instead of having plethora of labor legislations, they just wanted to have a few. And that was the objective which has been mentioned as a preamble in every enactment. And also amending the labor laws. So some provisions have been amended and some provisions have remained the same. So we will see as to what are those major provisions that have been amended. And one of the major objectives of the government is to give flexibility to the employers in terms of hiring or having the right kind of mix of employees. We know that in India, unlike in the Western parts of the world, once we hire an employee, especially a workman, it is very, very difficult to either lay off or retrench, even when the businesses are not doing well. So this is where the government has given some amount of flexibility. It is not complete hire and fire kind of a policy, but some amount of flexibility so that the employers can have the right kind of mix of employees in terms of permanent, contractual labor, fixed term employees, gig workers, consultants, etc. We will touch upon those things aspects. And the third one is that we know that there have been several litigations related to contract labor. So this is where the government wanted to streamline and systematize the contract labor laws, and that's where some attempt has been made to do that one as well. And then the wages, if you ask me to mention or talk about only one particular aspect in all these four labor codes, which has created a lot of interest, a lot of curiosity and a lot of anxiety among the employers, that's the definition of wages. The definition of wages has been rationalized. It has been standardized in all the codes, and they have had one definition for wages, and we will see that definition because that's the most important change that has been brought in through these labor codes. And then finally, in terms of recognition of unions, only in Maharashtra there was a specific legislation, which was Maharashtra Recognition of Trade Unions and Prevention of Unfair Labor Practices. That has been made a central act in the form of Industrial Relations Code, and those provisions have been incorporated in the code, and we will touch upon those aspects as well. And we, like we have talked about it, 29 labor codes got repealed through these 4 labor codes. And then standardized definition in wages, the biggest one. And then also, we all know about the minimum wages. And of course, gems and jewelry also, you have been implementing the minimum wages as announced by the appropriate government or the state government. Going forward, the change is that the central government will announce the national floor wage. And again, we will see that one as to what are the implications of that announcement of national floor wage on your industry. And then there is a new definition of fixed term employment. For the first time in the history of our labor legislations, fixed term employment has been defined. We will see that definition as well in the subsequent slides. And similarly, gig workers, home-based workers, platform workers, and unorganized workers, so they find their definitions in these codes. And government has defined all these people with an intent to implement social security schemes like employee state insurance, or bringing in certain welfare schemes like disability schemes or medical schemes, etc. We will see some of those details as well. And like I said, the unions, the negotiating unions, I think that this is going to change the employee relations or industrial relations situation in many of the organizations or many industries across the country. And this is where again the employer will have to look within and understand as to what exactly is happening on the employee relations. And the knowledge has been drawn from several state acts. Some of the state acts which were limited to particular states earlier, now they have taken that knowledge or taken those provisions from the state acts, they made it part of the central labor codes. And similarly, from some of the Supreme Court judgments, I'll touch upon those aspects also in the subsequent slides. The judgments of Supreme Court have been taken and those judgments have been incorporated as part of these labor codes. And one important thing we need to understand is that the penalties for contraventions have been increased multifold. In many cases, it has been increased by 10 times. And also, since at ELP and personally, from ELP, on behalf of ELP and on behalf of the employers organizations, I keep talking to the Secretary of Labor or Joint Secretary of Labor, who have been spearheading the implementation of these codes. And what I understand from them is that the government is very, very strict about the implementation. And this is where the penalties have been increased multifold. Again, from the gems and jewelry industry, understanding as to what are those implications and what needs to be implemented. If there is any contravention, how do we ensure that there is compliance is what we need to look at. The government intends to implement all these 4 labor codes from April 1, 2021. The rules on code on wages have been announced. They have asked the employers associations for objections and comments, which the employers associations have given. All other rules are awaited. But what I understand is that government is very, very particular about implementing these codes from April 1, 2021. The employers associations have filed a few representations asking for clarity and also asking for relief on some of the changes. So I'll touch upon as to what are those representations and where perhaps the gems and jewelry industry also can file some of the representations even now also and seek for relief or changes in the intending codes. And then lastly, the inspectors who were earlier acting as a sort of implementers, only as implementers or policing as to what has not been implemented, they have been renamed as inspector cum facilitators. So the intention here is that they need to inform and sensitize both employers as well as workers so that the implementation, their role is to facilitate implementation rather than catching hold of employers as to why it has not been implemented. That's the objective of the government. And from ELP perspective, when we look at the employers, the gems and jewelry industry in this particular case, we need to give lots of clarity as to what is changing, make each company in the industry understand as to what are the changes and what are the implications. That's number one. The second is what are the cost related implications, how the cost has been going up. Is there a possibility of complying with the law and again containing the cost? That is the second area where we have been helping some of the employers within your own industry and even outside the other industries. And the third thing is compliance. Like I said, compliance is going to be big. We all need to focus on the compliance part of it. Moving ahead and looking at the Code on Wages, the Code on Wages has repealed the Payment of Wages Act, the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Bonus Act, and the Equal Remuneration Act. Specifically, what they have done is, the contract labor definition, which finds its place in 3 codes: Code on Wages, Social Security Code, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. What the government has done is that the contract labor definition, while the contract labor, we can still take contract labor through the contractor, either supply of labor or on work basis. What they have excluded from the contract labor definition is those who regularly employed by the contractor for any activity of the contractor's establishment, and where the contractor has given an appointment order specifying this conditions of employment to do such people, and where they are covered under the social security schemes like PF and ESI, they are not regarded as contract labor working for us, in the sense that, if I am running a gems and jewelry company, so all the people who are part of the contractor's establishment furthering his business, they are not my contract labor. That means that the supervisors who come in to ensure that the contract labor are working in our establishment, those supervisors are not part of it. Here is an action point for anybody in any industry or in any company. Ensuring that the contract labor have been covered under the social security schemes of the contract labor, PF and ESI codes, his codes, we should not cover those contract labor working through the contractor in the PF and ESI codes of our company, is the point I'm making. Second is ensuring that the contractor issues an appointment letter or conditions of employment to those contract labor is another important thing one has to do. And in terms of the definition of employee, again, the definition has been broad-based, and everybody is now covered under the definition of employee. If you look at it, skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, manual, operational, supervisory, managerial, administrative, technical, or clerical work, everything is covered in that, if they are employed for hire or reward. So the exclusion of employee from the employee definition comes from the worker definition. Again, in the definition of worker, everybody gets covered, which means what? If a skilled or semi-skilled or unskilled person or a manual operator drawing any amount of wages, they are still workers under these codes. So who are excluded from the definition of workers? One is those who are mainly employed in managerial or administrative capacity. And second is those who are employed in supervisory capacity, drawing wages above 15,000 rupees per month. The catch here is that the managerial or supervisory has not been defined in any of the codes. We have made representation saying that give us some clarity, but what we have heard back is that there are judgments of the Supreme Court on this matter, so there is no much need of defining managerial or supervisory. So the action point here for gems and jewelry is what? Understanding as to who are the workers, who are the supervisors, and who are the managerial associates in your respective organizations. I think many employers have started this exercise at this point in time, just to understand as to who are those supervisors by nature of work. It is not by designation. Again, that's where it is not so simple to just write all the supervisors by their designations. The Supreme Court in the past judgments talked about dominant nature test. This is where we are supporting some of our employees to create this kind of segregation as to who are workers, who are supervisors, and who are managers. That is one exercise that you may have to take up. And in terms of the definition of wages, like I said at the beginning, this is the biggest change. So I have mentioned the entire definition here for better clarity, but in a nutshell, everything gets, in the first place, everything gets covered under the definition of wages. That is part number one, everything gets covered in the definition of wages. Then what the definition says is that certain things are excluded. They are not part of wages. What are those excluded things? The first thing is bonus, statutory bonus paid under the Payment of Bonus Act. That is excluded. It's not wages under the definition of wages. The second thing that has been excluded is the value of any house accommodation or supply of light, water, medical attendance, or other amenities, or any service excluded from the computation of wages by a general or special order of the appropriate government. Its value of any house accommodation and all other amenities related to that, those are also excluded from the definition of wages. The third thing that got excluded is the contribution paid by the employer to pension or provident fund. This is quite understandable. The contribution which the employer pays to pension or provident fund, it's not part of the definition of wages. And then the conveyance allowance paid to the employers, that is also excluded. And the next one, which is the biggest one, clause E here, any sum paid to the employed person to defray special expenses. Again, what are those sums paid to the employees to defray special expenses? It depends on case-to-case basis. And say, for example, a salesperson traveling the upcountry market for sale, getting TADA, that is obviously, that is a sum paid to defray special expenses. Those are excluded from the definition of wages. And house rent allowance is also excluded. And then any remuneration paid as part of any award or settlement is excluded. Overtime allowance is also excluded. Any commission payable to the employee is excluded. Again, representations have been made saying that, manufacturing incentive or sales incentive, is it commission or not? Its commission is excluded. Any gratuity payable is also excluded. Retrenchment compensation or retirement benefits are also excluded. So far, so good. No confusion at all. There are everything gets covered under the definition of wages, and certain things are excluded from the definition of wages. That's what we have seen. The biggest catch, the biggest twist comes here in the next paragraph, where the government or the legislature, the Code on Wages, has mentioned that the exclusions cannot be more than 50% of the wages. You can have any number of exclusions, but it cannot be more than 50%. Which means what is the impact of this definition on us? Earlier, in the total remuneration, if the basic salary is 20% of the total remuneration, or 25% or 30%, whatever is the percentage, we were paying some of the social security contributions like provident fund on that 20% or 25% only. Now, because the exclusions cannot be more than 50%, all the contributions and also calculation of some of the benefits like overtime or leave with wages, they need to be done on 50%. Again, the employers have made representation saying that increase this to 75%. In our cases, in some of our cases, the cost increase will be too much, and that is where the government is also examining that one. And there is one more important point in this definition, which is any remuneration paid in kind. It's not only in cash, any remuneration paid in kind, like a free meal coupon or a free travel somewhere as part of the vacation plan, all that needs to be considered as part of the wages, subject to a maximum of 15%. So this is the biggest change that we were talking about, and many of the employers have started doing an exercise. This is what Nishant was also mentioning at the beginning of our session. Every employer will have to see, and of course, we are helping some of the members from the gems and jewelry industry as well, looking at each section of your employees and understanding as to what are the components. In some cases, the excluded components are less than 50%, which means what? Then we will end up paying either PF or some other social security or some other benefit on 70% or 80%. So that, which means we can load a little bit more into either HRA, house rent allowance, or sums to defray special expenses. This is where it is a case-to-case exercise that we have started doing, helping some of our clients. And I talked about national floor wage in the executive summary. The central government will announce the national floor wage, and the twist here is that the state governments will keep announcing the minimum wages, but those minimum wages cannot be less than the national floor wage. That means that when the central government fixes national floor wage by region, of course, the particular state cannot fix the minimum wage lower than the national floor wage. So that is, we are waiting to see as to what is the national floor wage. The government will consult the Central Advisory Board and state governments before fixing the national floor wage. So our understanding is that the Central Advisory Board is being constituted. So once that is done, we will get to know the details. And we are also from ELP side, we are trying to be part of these discussions so that we can represent the voice of many of the employers. And moving on to the next code, which is the Code on Social Security. All these acts which are mentioned on the screen, the Workmen's Compensation Act, all earlier social security schemes which were independent in nature, they have been clubbed together or consolidated. The Workmen's Compensation Act, the Employees State Insurance Act, the Employees Provident Fund EPF Act, the Employment Exchange Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act, the Maternity Benefit Act, the Payment of Gratuity Act, the Cine Workers Welfare Fund Act, the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act, the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, all these have been consolidated and the Code on Social Security has been formulated. What are the big changes? The fixed term employment, like I said at the beginning, has been defined. So it simply says that it is engagement of an employee on the basis of a written contract of employment for a fixed period, which means what? We can engage an employee for a period of 3 months or 6 months or 1 year or 2 years. There is no need for taking a person on the rolls of the company as a permanent employee and bear the cost even when the business is not doing well. So after the fixed period, the contract comes to an end and we can safely terminate the services of the employee. So again, the biggest thing that has come in as part of this fixed term employment is that the hours of work, wages, allowances, and other benefits paid to the fixed term employee shall not be less than of a permanent employee doing the same work or work of a similar nature. So this is a big change. We can engage fixed term employees, but at the same time, if there is a permanent employee doing the permanent worker, rather doing the same work or similar nature of work, then the hours of work, wages, allowances, etc. should be the same. And similarly, the gratuity, I'll come to that part. The gratuity part of it also, what the law says is that we need to pay the gratuity to fixed term employees even if they don't have that 5-year period, which is the normal minimum period for gratuity. So I'll come to that gratuity part in the subsequent slides. So then the gig worker has been defined. The gig worker is what? One who performs work or participates in a work arrangement and earns from such activities outside of traditional employer-employee relationship. There need not be a employer-employee relationship here. It is outside the traditional employee. That means that a consultant becomes a gig worker. So there is no employer-employee relationship, but participates in a work arrangement, takes up a project and completes that one and gets paid for that. So similarly, home-based worker. So home-based workers, as the name suggests, people who work from their home premises. So they are also brought in under the Social Security Code. And then the platform workers. I'm sorry. The platform workers are those who work with an online platform to access other organizations or individuals to solve specific problems. Many of the organizations like TCS and all, where there are online platforms to access other companies' information and then solve the specific problems of computer related and other things. They are all brought in under the Code on Social Security. And then the unorganized workers. all these, the purpose of defining all these people is to bring them under the social security schemes. One is that, it states, the Code on Security states that they will be covered under the employee state insurance, number one. And then second is the central government has reserved the right, they shall frame and notify suitable welfare schemes for all these unorganized workers in terms of life and disability cover, health and maternity benefits, old age protection, education, provident fund, employment injury, so on and so forth. And similar provisions have been brought in for gig workers and platform workers as well. This is what I was saying, that flexibility has been given, but at the same time, the employees who are thus employed by employers is being protected by these legislations. And of course, these gig workers have to register on an online platform. And then the Provident Fund, which was 12%, has been mentioned as 10%. So it might eventually, what we understand, it might through a notification, it will come back to 12%. Nothing can be reduced and everything will go up is our understanding. So, but in the Social Security Code, the Provident Fund contribution has been mentioned as 10%. And employee state insurance, one important change that has been brought in is that earlier employee state insurance was covered by region through a notification, a specific region. Let's say, for example, in Mumbai, if one area, so in one area in suburban is covered, maybe in some other area, in some other suburb is not covered because it was through notifications. But now the government wants to extend this to all regions and all areas in the country. And also they want to bring in workers working in hazardous industries under ESI benefits, even if there is only one worker. And of course, what is hazardous industry has been defined in the schedule under the Social Security Code. And also the government said when there is a pandemic or endemic, the government can, for a period of 3 years, can reduce the ESI contribution or even the PF contribution. And perhaps that's the reason why the PF contribution has been reduced from 12% to 10%. And gratuity, again, gratuity has caused a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety and confusion among the employers. What has been changed? The 5 years for permanent employees has remained the same, the minimum period for payment of gratuity, which is calculated as per the legal decisions as 4 years, 240 days continuous service. So here for fixed term employees, the code says that even if they have not completed any specific period, they should be paid pro rata. This is where Code of Social Security says that they should be paid on pro rata basis for fixed term employees, and where employees die, that was already there in case of deceased employees was already there earlier in the code. But for the first time, fixed term employees on pro rata basis. Here again, there is a dichotomy. What is that? Industrial Relations Code, where the fixed term employees are defined, it says that the qualifying period for gratuity is 1 year. Again, we have raised this with the government for clarification, and we understand that it's going to be 1 year qualifying period for payment of gratuity for fixed term employees. Wherever there are such fixed term employees, or even wherever there are other employees by name of consultant or whatever, examining all those contracts by gems and jewelry industry is an important thing to ensure that there is no liability on unintended liability of gratuity, because gratuity is calculated for the entire period of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. So this is where again examining all those contracts is what is advised to gems and jewelry industry. And like I talked about 50% gross wages, it is we saw the definition of wages earlier. So that will be made applicable to all other things like leave encashment, gratuity, PF, overtime, everything. This is where understanding as to what exactly is the financial liability is an important thing. Of course, the maximum gratuity payable is 20 lakhs. Some of the companies have been paying the actual gratuity, even if it exceeds 20 lakhs, this is where again this needs to be re-examined by some of the employers. Moving on to the third code, which is Industrial Relations Code. It repealed the Trade Unions Act, the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, and the Industrial Disputes Act. And what are the key changes here? One is, I talked about fixed term employment. It talks about gratuity for 1 year, and clarity has been sought. We covered that one already. The next biggest change is standing orders, because it repealed the Standing Orders Act. The standing orders now is applicable to establishments employing 300 or more, as again is 50 or 100 in the past. And also the government, what we understand is that the government is coming up with some 3 or 4 model standing orders by industry, which means that they'll have one for mines, one for manufacturing, and one for services, so on and so forth. And there is no need for the industry or the company to go for certified standing orders. They can simply adopt the model standing orders related to the industry. So yours, I think, comes under manufacturing, or so this is where adopting those standing orders, and we need to see as to what's going to be there in the standing orders, but I don't think that there will be any surprises there. And in terms of the permission for layoff, retrenchment, and closure, earlier the Industrial Disputes Act, through its Chapter 5B, had 100 as the minimum number, which means if you have more than 100 workers working for you, if you want to lay off or retrench or close down your establishment when things are not working out well, prior permission of the state government is needed. Now it has been increased to 300, right? So that means that if there are less than 300 workers, 300 workers, so there is no need to take permission from the state government for layoff or retrenchment or closure. This is again another leeway that has been given to the employers. And in terms of strikes, earlier workers going on mass casual leave, applying leave and going on leave was dominant in some of the industries. So now if 50% or more workers take leave, so that is considered as a strike. And similarly, earlier only in public utility services, the notice of strike was to be given. Now it has been made mandatory in every industry, in every company. If the workers want to go on a strike, a 60 days prior notice has to be given, and strike can be taken up only after giving the notice. And similarly for lockdown or lockout also, a similar kind of a provision has been laid down. And whenever there is a retrenchment of worker, the employer will have to pay 15 days wages of that particular retrenched worker to the government reskilling fund, so that the government can reskill all those workers, and so that they'll get some other job elsewhere. And in terms of the unions, I was talking about it in my executive summary as well, the negotiating union or council. So earlier this was only specific to Maharashtra under MRPU Pulp Act. So now if there is one union, one registered union, that has to be recognized as the recognized as the negotiating union of that particular establishment. If there are more than one union, whichever union has got 51% membership should be recognized as the negotiating union. If there are more than 2 unions, and if there are multiple unions, every registered union that has got not less than 20% of the workforce membership, one member should be invited from each such union to form a negotiating council. The employer can have discussions with that negotiating council and arrive at a wage settlement or some other binding settlement. Again, let's take a pause for a minute and see as to how this is going to change the industrial relations situation in some of the units. Wherever there are multiple unions, registered unions, if the workers are paying contributions to more than one union, then there is a problem to determine as to what is the percentage of membership each union has got. So again, the employers have represented to have secret ballot as part of this process. And then the occupational safety, health and working conditions code, it has repealed whole lot of enactments. So all the acts which were dealing with safety, health and working conditions like Factories Act, Plantations Labor Act, Mines Act, Working Journalists, Motor Transport, BD and cigar workers, conditions of employment, contract labor regulation and abolition, sales promotion employees, interstate migrant workmen, city workers, dock workers, building and other construction work, all these acts got repealed and this code has been formulated. What are the big changes that have come in this? One is it is applicable to establishment, and establishment is any industry, trade or business or manufacturing or occupation where there are 10 or more workers. It's applicable to them. And it is applicable to the contractors establishments also if the contractors establishment is employing more than 50 or more workers. And then if any the establishment has got more than 10 interstate migrant workers, this is applicable, and all such employers will have to cover them under social security and pay a lump sum amount of fare for travel to hometown every year. And then the definition of factory, it has been earlier, it was 10 workers with power and 20 without power. Now it has been increased to 20 with power and 40 without power for factories. That is the clause of applicability. And in terms of industry, like I was saying earlier, the wisdom from the Supreme Court judgment in the case of Bangalore water supply case versus A. Rajappa. This was a 1984 case where the triple test was laid down. So whether to know whether a particular establishment is industry or not, whether the workers can raise an industrial dispute or not in that establishment. One thing which has been done through this industrial relations code, which we had seen just before this. So the contract labor are not defined there. In effect, the contract labor cannot raise an industrial dispute against the principal employer for confirmation of service and all that stuff. That is one good thing that has been done. Coming back to the definition of industry, the triple test has been brought in. It is simple, it is systematic activity, coordination between employer and employees for the supply of goods or services to satisfy the human needs or consumption. So that is the triple test that has been brought in here. And in terms of principal employer, for factories, it is the occupier that is the principal employer. And for industrial establishments, it is a manager or a managing director who has got the ultimate affairs of the establishment. So in every establishment, it's better the establishment identifies a manager and gives authority that he or she has got the ultimate control over the affairs of the establishment, so that the managing director will not be receiving the notices or prosecution notices whenever there is a non-compliance part of it. And in terms of core activity of an establishment, the contract labor cannot be engaged in core activity of an establishment. This was there in Andhra Pradesh through an amendment to the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act earlier, that has been brought into this occupational and working conditions code now. So what is the core activity for which the establishment is set up is the core activity. What is not covered under the core activity is sanitation works like sweeping, cleaning, dusting and collection and disposal of all kinds of waste, watch and ward, the security staff, we can still engage contract labor, that's not a core activity. Canteen and catering services is not a core activity. Loading and unloading is not a core activity. Running of hospitals or educational institutions or guest houses or training institutions, clubs within the premises or outside to support the main activity of the establishment, that is also not a core activity, and contract labor can be deployed there. Courier services, which are in nature of support services of an establishment. Civil and other constructional works, including maintenance, gardening and maintenance of laws, housekeeping and laundry services, transport services, including ambulance services, any activity of intermittent nature, even if that constitutes a core activity of an establishment. All these are considered as non-core activities, and you can safely deploy contract labor in these activities. So now the employers can engage women workers beyond 7 p.m., beyond 7 in the evening, and before 6 a.m. in the morning, 6 in the morning, of course, with their consent. So women can be deployed in any nature of work, in any shift, but taking consent from them is what is needed. And the government wants to digitize a whole lot of things. So that's what the back-end machinery is working at this point in time, is what we understand. Things like electronic registrations, notice of commencement or cessation of operation in manufacturing units, maintaining registers, issue of wage slips and filing returns, inspection schemes, everything is being digitized. And also the government is contemplating having a single registration for establishments having 10 or more employees. We don't have, under all these codes, there will be one registration for the entire establishment. So it is a single window kind of a thing. And what are the key issues we are hearing from our employees? We have discussed enough about the wages. There is a major concern or issue, and many employers have started that exercise of understanding the components of separate different sections of people, and how, if there is a possibility of reallocating amounts into some of the excluded components. So that is one of the biggest things the employers have started doing. The second thing is, as part of this wage definition, understanding as to what are those sums paid to the employed person to defray special expenses. Wherever, let's say for example, as part of a company's policy, and where wearing uniform at workplace is a part of the nature of the industry, so that could form part of sums paid to employed person to defray special expenses. So here we are advising many of the HR departments as to what kind of policy needs to be put in place, how they can bring it under the sums paid legally, sums paid to the employed person to defray special expenses. And similarly, for every company, the component specific exercise, like on wages, like I said, or salary components, looking at each one of them and identifying as to what is included and what is excluded, and identifying to see what percentage is excluded, and if it is less than 50%, where to load a little bit more, is what the employers have been doing, and where we are also supporting the employers. And the code on social security, the gratuity, I talked about it. It includes the past period also. If we are going to calculate gratuity on 50%, and if there is no 20 lakhs cap also, in many cases, including the past period into account, it could be quite a heavy load on the employers. This has been represented to the government as well. And of course, wherever a provision has to be made in the books of accounts, making a provision for gratuity is an important thing the employers are dealing with. And one thing I talked about is encashment of leave. The workers are now entitled to encash their leave at the end of every calendar year. Earlier, it was only at the time of termination of service, whereas now the workers can ask for encashment of leave, and 30 days of leave can be carried forward. Some of the companies have got 160 days accumulation, 100 days accumulation, 90 days accumulation, and all that. Again, looking at those policies, HR policies, and determining as to what needs to be done is another exercise the employers are requesting us to do, and where we are supporting them. And again, I talked about segregating workers, supervisors, and managers, basis the judicial pronouncement and basis the nature of job. That is another key issue for the employers. And 100% compliance without exception is the other thing. And since we are in February, end of February rather, the budget comes into force from 1st of April. Some of the things like putting a cap on 20 lakhs gratuity wherever there is no such cap, and making a provision for gratuity bringing down the leave accumulation limits by encashing excess leaves before the labor codes kicking in, and Provident Fund, again, for new employees, keeping the cap of 15,000, because the law permits to pay gratuity of the Provident Fund only to those who are drawing 15,000 rupees per month. So, but many companies have covered everybody. So for new employees, can we do that is one thing, employers are examining, and re-looking at the compensation structures, policies, contracts, and practices. If there are different category of employees like consultants, etc., looking at their contracts is an important aspect. And then finally, our suggestion to employers, and this is our suggestions to gems and jewelry industry as well. For each one of your companies, set up an internal task force consisting of HR, legal, finance, and review the changes that are coming in specific to your company with a labor law expert. That's an important one. And looking at the financial assessment and understanding as to how the financial situation is going to change post implementation of these codes, and realigning compensation structure wherever there is a possibility, and incorporating any impact within the salary budgets or other budgets in the 2021 budget, and assessing technology readiness for your payroll processing, and making a representation to the government and gearing up for 100% compliance is what we are advising to our employers. And in terms of representations, these are the representations that have been given to the government. 50% exclusions to 75% exclusions from the wage, and gratuity implementation with prospective effect, not for the past period, and layoff, retrenchment, and closure permission for 1,000 or more workers, and secret ballot, I talked about it. And there was a confusion around overtime, whether it is payable to managerial or supervisory. From my perspective, it is not payable, it is only for workers, but these representations also have been given to the government. And eliminating inconsistency in terms of payment of gratuity to fixed term employees, because there is a difference in what the Social Security Code says and what the IR code says. Like I said, one says pro rata and the other one says 1 year. So that representation has been given, and changing the date of implementation from 1st of April to 1st of July. So this is what I have in terms of the presentation. I'm sorry, I think I've taken a little bit more time than what we intended at the beginning. But let me just see if there are a few questions that we can take.
PV, thank you so much. We'll just wait for questions. In case there are none, let me start with questions, having understood the industry to some extent.
Yeah.
Maybe let me put forth the requirement of the industry. So PV, one question for this industry could be that a lot of work is done on job work basis, and quite a few of these job workers or contract labor could be on piece rate workers. Like number of pieces, say if they're in the diamond industry or jewelry industry, number of pieces which is produced or carried out, their consideration, their remuneration may be linked to that. Any specific pointers for from that perspective that the industry should keep in mind?
No, where there is piece rate, the average wage needs to be calculated as laid down in the code to arrive at the wage. So because piece rate is variable, basis the number of pieces produced, they'll get paid. This is where the code talks about average wage calculation. It says that the average wage needs to be calculated. The specific process is given in the code, the Social Security Code. So the industry has to follow that average wage calculation for those piece rate workers.
Right. One more question, and it's a little practical sort of question, because there could be, this industry, a lot of the members of the industry have grown over a period of time, and they may have put up new units, etc. And
I'm sorry, Nishant. Hello, Nishant.
I think there is a disturbance.
Nishant, we have lost you.
there could be possibility for be fully HR compliant. Sorry, am I audible?
Well, we lost you in between, Nishant.
Okay.
The question, please.
I will just repeat that there may be some situations where the unit or the industry player may not be fully compliant, or
Yeah.
the structure which they may have adopted may not be one of the most efficient structures.
Yes.
And now they may be looking at implementing a structure which is under the new code fully compliant.
Yes.
Any pointers, any tips you want to provide? Of course, our suggestion would be that they should get it reviewed from a labor expert, as you've mentioned,
Yeah.
because to avoid any scrutiny. But any cautions that they should take, safeguards that they should take, so as to avoid any scrutiny, because obviously there is a change in the structure from what they were earlier operating,
Yeah.
and not sort of making a red carpet to the authorities to come and scrutinize them further.
Yeah. See, one biggest thing is that, in fact, we are working with one of the companies within this industry. One of the things is that in some cases, the excluded components are less than 50%, which means what? That particular company will end up paying the social security contributions on 70% or 80% for some section of employees in the unit. So the biggest pointer is looking at the component by component structure for every category of employees and understanding as to what percentage is already excluded, number one. If it is less than 50%, you are going to spend more money than what the law intends. So that's not the intention of the law. So that needs to be looked at. That's a big pointer for many of the companies here. And then the second thing is, so when it is less than 50%, the decision is, which one to load more, a little bit more. Is it travel or conveyance allowance, or is it HRA, or is it something related to electricity or whatever? So again, understanding that as to where exactly we can load, because it is blindly we cannot load and say that 80% of the total compensation is my HRA. That is unreasonable. It is nobody is going to accept that one. That could land somebody in trouble. The third thing I would say is that for some of the things like medical, etc., do we have the right kind of policy, HR policy in place? The right kind of HR policy in place. Many of these things should be backed by a policy. So there again, writing those policies is an important thing. I would like to say, these are the three things that would come to my mind immediately.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, PV. I think we've overrun the time. There are a couple of questions. PV, you want to see if you want to take one of those questions, and then we can wind up the webinar.
Yeah. So one great initiative of GGFT. Okay, thank you. And can we have this PPT? We are circulating a note where all these points are covered. So the PPT is not being circulated, but a note, a descriptive note, giving all these points is being circulated, and we will send you that note as well. Nishant will send it across to everyone, right? And then
Nishant, there is one more question from the participant. How will the carriers will be treated as per the new code of this?
Sorry, please repeat the question, sir.
Yeah.
How will the karigars be treated as per new code? So karigars are basically job workers, or individual contract workers who work, like I mentioned, on a piece rate basis.
Yeah.
So I think you've already answered that, but if you want to just clarify that.
Job work or labor supply, both are covered in the definition of their contract labor. So there is not much of difference in how they are being treated from the earlier contract labor regulation and abolition. And we'll have to wait and see if there is going to be any change in the state rules or whatever. But as far as my knowledge goes, within these four codes, there has not been no major change.
Okay. PV, there's one more question. I'll just raise that if you can answer. Otherwise, we'll send them an email. A contract worker working from his home also employs some workers. While I am to deal with the former only and pay wages to him, that is the contract worker who's working from home, not to worry about who he employs, the contract worker. How
Yeah.
the later are to be treated? Will they be treated as my workers? So I have appointed a contract worker. He is only responsible to me, and he in turn appoints somebody else.
Yeah, yeah. See, the straightforward answer is that, so if the contract labor whom we have engaged or you have engaged working from home engages somebody else, one is that there is no responsibility of us unless, so if we cover such people also in our PF code or ESI code, or if we pay knowing fully well to this contract worker through in his contract saying that we are also paying this wage for the people who are working for you. This is where the responsibility is not there on the employer. But having said that, how the contract with the contract worker working from home is structured is an important element as regards the employee working for that contract worker. Okay, and the employer should never cover in his or her PF or ESI codes all such people working for those contract workers or contractors.
Okay, thank you so much, PV, and thank you to the participants for being patient and hearing us out. We'll be happy to respond to any queries that you may have. In relation to the PPT, as Dr. Murthy has already mentioned, we will be circulating a note which is comprehensive enough, covering most of the parts of this PPT.
Yeah.
The PPT being a copyrighted product, we'll be not able to circulate that. But any queries that any participants has, we'll be happy to respond to them. They may route it either through GJPC or to us directly. And over to Sudhir for concluding remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Murthy, for detailed presentation from your end on this important topic. Thank you, Nishant, for all your help. And I guess this is very helpful for the our industry players and members. So I thank all of them for participating in this important session, and look forward to connect with you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nishant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.